Fight fans, this is Anchored Aggression. I'm one of your hosts, Brett Cagle, joined today by Anthony Ballister. We're going to break down the UFC St. Louis Fight Night card from last week and also look at the Lomachenko versus Kambosos boxing world title matchup that was on Saturday night as well. Anthony, which one do you want to get into first?
We can start off with UFC first.
Awesome. So in the main event, we had Derek Lewis facing Rodrigo Nasimento. Nasimento came into this one 11-1 with his only loss to Chris Daukaus by knockout. Derek Lewis got the job done in front of the St. Louis crowd, and he had some antics afterwards that made waves on Twitter and social media. What did you think of Derek Lewis's performance, and were you surprised at all about how the fight played out?
Definitely wasn't surprised at all. With Derek Lewis, you're always going to get a show. You're always going to be entertaining. That's why, usually on a fight night, Derek Lewis is usually main eventing. He's always going to have an exciting fight. And just like I predicted, I said it was going to be first round. It wasn't first round, but it was vintage Derek Lewis. Like I said, he had a great performance, got a great KO. What a hard punch that he landed on Nasimento. Dropped him right away. I knew it was game over from that on. It's nice to see him win this fight. It's nice to see, with Derek Lewis, anytime he steps in that cage and loses, it could be the last time we see him in the octagon. So, and that's someone I'd definitely, love to watch fight. So I'd love to see him continue win. See him, try to climb the ladder. Obviously, he's a little on the older side, not sure how far he can go. But I'd love to see Derek Lewis fight more ranked fighters. Unfortunately for Nasimento, it's a step back. He's going to have to go back to the drawing board and climb back the ladder as well. But what a performance by Derek Lewis. What did you think?
Yeah, I thought that Rodrigo Nasimento didn't look bad at times. I thought it was, he actually had won one of those rounds. I had it 1-1 going into that third round. Derek Lewis lands a big punch, adds to his, historic record for UFC knockouts in the heavyweight division. And, I think that really what played a factor in this one was the experience of Lewis. Over 30 professional fights, going into his 40th professional fight in this one, and Nasimento only going into his 12th professional, or only having 12 professional fights coming into this one. I think that really plays a big factor in how this fight went. Nasimento got caught on the feet, kind of on Derek Lewis's range. When he tried for takedown attempts, it looks like he was getting them at times. In the first round, Derek Lewis actually landed a trip of his own, which was interesting to see. We haven't really seen that from Derek Lewis before, but Nasimento, I thought, looked good at times. This is going to be a learning curve for him. I think that he's definitely UFC caliber, and we'll see him again in the future. But Derek Lewis, I'd like to see him get a good opponent next, and maybe another fight night main event or being on a pay-per-view main card. But great performance from Derek, and it's good to see him get a win and back in the win column.
Yeah, and I think, with his personality and his star power, I think he opens a lot of windows for him. I've heard rumors that maybe he like to fool around with WWE. I wouldn't mind seeing that as well. He's definitely going to take some time off, and he'll probably be waiting until the end of the year to fight again. But, I love to see Derek Lewis, and I think whether he's fighting the UFC or doing something else, we're definitely always going to be seeing him, not too long.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a staple of the heavyweight division. Him and Tai Tuivasa are really brawlers. I know they fought before, but maybe a rematch there or something. I'm trying to think of matchups for Lewis potentially that would entice him. At this age, I don't know if he wants to keep fighting, up-and-coming contenders. I know he called Rodrigo Nasimento a cab driver from Brazil. I'm sure he wants to fight somebody with name recognition and value as well, and might want to get that win back against Tuivasa, who's also on a losing streak as well. But as far as next opponents are concerned, that's what I'd like to see for Derek Lewis. Do you have any names in mind?
Maybe like a Jargino Rosenstrike. He's coming off of a win. It'd be nice to see those two guys fight. I think any of those guys that are just outside the top 10 would be a great, matchup for him. I would like to see him put against a good striker. We've seen, what happens when he goes against great grapplers. So I just like to see him go up against a top 15 heavyweight, because that's always going to give us fireworks.
Yeah, and in this co-main event matchup, we had St. Louis native Joaquin Buckley in this one, putting on the performance of his career, in my opinion. I know he's had sensational knockouts in the past, but this was really a step up in competition, and he dominated this fight, 30-27 in my opinion. I thought Nursulton Ruziboev, we talked about the weight cut coming in last week, and I thought that really played a factor in this one. He looked slow to me. He was throwing one shot at a time, really loading up. It didn't seem like he had the energy to land those 2 to 3 to 4 punch combinations that we saw him, get guys out of there in the middleweight division with. But for Buckley, as far as that was concerned, he looked good on the feet, was able to take the fight to the ground when he wanted to. Play off the crowd. They were all going crazy for him. He had 113 total strikes in this one and a knockdown. Outstruck Nursulton significantly, almost 70 significant strikes more. I really liked Buckley's performance. I think that he might be a title challenger in the welterweight division. Depends on the matchup. I don't think that he'd do too well against a guy like Ian Gary or some of the maybe elite strikers with good takedown defense. But I think he's a player. He's somebody that's going to be in these fight night cards and is going to be a popular fighter for fight fans to watch and enjoy going forward.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Joaquin Buckley, ever since he moved to welterweight, he's been unbelievable. And I've been very, very, impressed by his performance. I feel like he gets better with each and every fight. This was definitely his best performance. I think, Ruziboev, had his moments, particularly in the first. But like I said, I think this weight cut was too much for him. I think that was evident. As the fight go on, I think it started to wear. I don't think he had the same cardio. I don't think he had the same chin and his endurance. I think he's better to go back up at 185. But that doesn't take anything away from Joaquin Buckley. He looked great. He did call out Conor McGregor. Obviously, that's not realistic. Terrible call out. But, I also heard maybe Gilbert Burns. I wouldn't mind that. We've seen Gilbert Burns, fight GDM to see if he was a title contender. We've seen him fight Bilal. Pretty much if you get past Gilbert Burns, you're in a title contending shot or a number one contenders match. So I think that's the perfect spot for Joaquin Buckley. You got Rakhmonov and GDM probably in the next number one contenders match. Let's see if, Joaquin Buckley could contend with, the top of the guys in the division.
Yeah, that was one of the worst call-outs in UFC history. The only one that I could think of that was maybe worse than that was Alistair Overeem calling out Brock Lesnar when he wasn't even on the roster yet, and it was kind of rumored that Brock was coming back. Brock eventually fought Mark Hunt, but Alistair Overeem called him out after beating Frank Mir. And that, was head-scratching at the time as well. But, for Buckley, I think that Daniel Cormier had the best opinion that I've heard of this yet. I think he wanted to see Buckley fight Sean Brady. I think that'd be a tremendous matchup. Sean Brady and Buckley, you have a guy with good takedown defense in Buckley, heavy hands. He can obviously get it done on the feet, very explosive. And then, obviously, Brady has one of the best grappling games in the entire division. He's very physically strong and has a black belt in jiu-jitsu. So I think that would be a really interesting stylistic matchup. And, you could put that in Philadelphia or on the East Coast somewhere, and it'd probably draw a lot of fans.
Yeah, and that'd be more of a fair of a matchup for Buckley because obviously we know Gilbert Burns is not in his prime anymore. Mm-hmm. He's definitely a little on the older side. Shane Brady's, right in his prime. He's one of the top guys. He's only got one loss on his career. I would be very fond of that matchup. I think stylistically that would be very entertaining for Sean Brady and, Joaquin Buckley.
Yeah, I think so as well. But congratulations for Buckley. That was a very impressive win. And speaking of impressive wins, the fight before this, Carlos Ulberg made a statement, knocking out Alonzo Menifield in, let me get this, 12 seconds. That has to be one of the fastest knockouts in light heavyweight history. Carlos Ulberg trains at City Kickboxing with Israel Adesanya and Dan Hooker and Alexander Volkanovski with Eugene Berryman. He trains at one of the best camps in the world. Explosive striker. We saw this on Saturday night. Menifield came in with a blitz, and Ulberg really hit him with a left hook, throwing wildly in the pocket against the cage. And it sent Menifield crashing to the canvas, and then he finished up against the cage. What did you think about Ulberg's performance, and do you think he's a real player at 205?
Yeah, 100%. And I think one way you could sum up this fight is if you blink, the fight was over. It was literally 2 seconds and it was done. Menifield, what a costly, and poor mistake for him to run in like that. You never should blitz in like that, especially against a guy like Carlos Ulberg. Ulberg capitalized on it. He showed fast and quick hands. He was able to capitalize on that and get the TKO. I definitely think he's a serious contender in this division. Honestly, I think with his potential and where he's at, I think he's one fight away from being in a title contending match. I would like for them to see him even give him like a guy, ranked, high up like a Rakic. I think he's that good. Give him like a guy who's like either in the top 5 or just outside the top 5. If he gets that past that test, then he's looking at a number one contenders match. I think he's one fight away from that, and I would like to see him get a guy ranked pretty high. Who do you think would be a good matchup for Ulberg?
I'd like to see Ulberg fight another striker, but his takedown defense is going to have to get tested here. before he gets to the top of the division. Magomed Ankalaev, has been on ice. I don't know what their plans are for him. He's going to have to fight somebody. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be Ulberg. I think potentially for Ulberg, if I was his management team, I would try to get him to fight Anthony Smith, and then I would try and get him into one of those matchups like you're talking about with a Rakic or an Ankalaev. I think he's one more fight away from that number one contender spot. You don't want to rush him too soon. And maybe if you throw him to a guy like Smith who's got a good ground game, like we just saw with his submission over Vitor Petrino, not necessarily Smith's going to, be like Ankalaev with that top pressure and smothering style, but still has a threat of the takedown. If we saw that against Ulberg, I think that'd answer a lot of questions before he ended up fighting the best fighters in the division. So I think that'd be a really good matchup and the one I'd like to see next.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And honestly, that's where my thoughts first went. The only thing is it just makes me feel bad for Anthony Smith because he's constantly been this gatekeeper. He was on a losing streak, losing to Johnny Walker and Khalil Roundtree. He finally beats Petrino, and then you put him against another young killer like that. And I just don't know if that's fair to Anthony Smith. But, hey, if Anthony Smith's down for it and the UFC wants to go with it, I think that's definitely a better route for, Ulberg's development. You don't want to rush him too soon and, have him go up against a Rakic and then completely, end his momentum. So I 100% agree.
Yeah, I think that's the move. If you look at the guys that Smith, his career is modeled after, the Robbie Lawlers, the Frankie Edgars. I know he wasn't a champion, but these guys who stick around and get in these wars, Smith takes punishment and he gives punishment. He's going to have to face some of these up-and-coming contenders. Robbie was having to go through Colby Covington and all these next wave of fighters as he was an aging fighter, and that's kind of in the same boat Smith's in right now. So I'd like to see him fight Ulberg next. Maybe if he beats Ulberg, he's in position to fight one of these guys again in a number one contenders matchup and maybe get a rematch with somebody he'd lost to previously. So I think there's a lot of the sky's the limit for Carlos Ulberg, though, potential-wise, in my opinion. 6'4" and very explosive. I can't wait to see him fight again. But also, on the next three fights we had on the main card here, we had two huge prospects get upset. Now, first in the lightweight division, we had Diego Ferreira, veteran of the sport, 19-5, defeated Mateusz Rebecki. And Rebecki's face looked terrible. There was photographs circulating the internet afterwards of his eyes completely shut, broken nose. He took a tremendous amount of punishment in this one, but Diego Ferreira really made a statement, stopped the takedown attempts of Rebecki. We hadn't seen that thus far. Rebecki, from what we had seen in his career previously, was a very strong athlete that was able to get guys to the ground and use his smothering style if he wasn't able to get them out of there on the feet. But Ferreira, to me, seemed more fluid with his punching. He seemed to be the faster fighter with his hands and really put volume on Rebecki. But Rebecki was tough, and he ended up falling in the third round, but he took a significant amount of punishment throughout that fight.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Definitely a huge upset. I definitely didn't see this coming. I know, heading into this fight, I didn't give Ferreira a chance. I thought Rebecki was on this really nice, win streak. I thought he had a high, trajectory. I thought he was just going to steamroll Ferreira. But I thought Rebecki looked great in the first round. He looked like he was on his way to winning the fight, and it looked like exactly like how I predicted. But Ferreira showed that experience. He came out and looked great in the second and third round and dominated both, leading to the TK, win. What a huge setback for Rebecki. But Ferreira showing that he could still hang, with the youngsters and proving that he's still far from done in this sport.
Yeah, and, for Rebecki, I think this is really a crossroads in your career here, losing to a 39-year-old fighter like Ferreira who was not ranked and was not really in title contention at all. Was a title contender 4 or 5 years ago, sure. And at one time was a very good ranked fighter. But Ferreira is well past his prime. And, for Rebecki, I don't think that he can climb the ladder here. He's going to have to look at whether, he wants to continue at this weight class or whether he wants to continue with the coaches that he has currently. But he's going to have to make an adjustment to his game if he wants to go up the ladder here in the lightweight division, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I know he's a pretty muscular guy, and he's kind of short for the division. I wouldn't mind maybe seeing him cut a little weight and maybe moving down the division. I think that may better suit him. But, yeah, he's definitely going to have to go back to the drawing board, speak to his coaches, and definitely have to try to rebound here. But he's definitely at a bad, spot. And, he could be, another bad loss away from potentially being out of the UFC altogether.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. So then we also had a very interesting fight between Sean Woodson and Alex Caceres. Sean Woodson, another St. Louis native. This was really close. Some people had it, for Woodson, but Caceres looked good in some rounds as well. The total striking numbers were 85 to 101 in this one, favoring Woodson. Woodson used the jab throughout the 3 rounds, and that was really what he utilized to get ahead on the volume scorecard there in the significant strike number. But, I liked Woodson's game. I think that he's a very long and lengthy competitor for the division, and somebody who people are going to have to deal with on the feet. But I'd like to see him fight a grappler next. He struggled with Luis Saldana a couple fights ago. So it's not like that he's, had a spotless career yet thus far in the UFC. I know he knocked out Terrence McKinney on the Contender Series and has had some good wins, but he's also looked, vulnerable in some certain areas. What did you make of this one?
I thought this was the closest fight of the night. Very, very competitive. Honestly, I thought this fight could go either way. If you had Alex Caceres winning on the scorecard, I wouldn't blame you. Both these guys put on a great display of striking. Both Woodson and Caceres both had their moments. I had Woodson winning rounds 2 and 3, and then I thought, Alex, definitely won round 3. So I gave round 1 and 2 to Woodson, round 3 to Alex. I thought 1 and 2 were very close. I thought round 3 was very, very decisive and definitely 100% Alex Caceres all the way. But I had Woodson winning the fight 2-1. Definitely glad the judges got it right. Very, very impressed by Woodson. Like you said, with his jab and his length and his reach, being 6'2", in that weight class, that featherweight is very, very, big. He's got to be, probably the tallest person at his weight class in the UFC. He's definitely going to, be ranked now at this point. I think he should challenge a guy probably just outside the top 10. He did call out Bryce Mitchell. I like that matchup. I think that could be a good matchup stylistically, him and Bryce Mitchell. And I think right where Sean Woodson is, I think, that's a good, competitor for where he's at in his development. And Alex Caceres, I'm not disappointed with him. I think maybe he should get another ranked fighter as well. Unfortunately, he will, not have a ranked position anymore. But I still think he's definitely, in consideration for one of the 15 best featherweights in the UFC.
Yeah, very talented, good on the ground, good on the feet. Looked good in times in this one. I agree with you. I had it 2-1 for Woodson, 29-28. I like the matchup with Bryce Mitchell as well, striker versus grappler there. And I mentioned when we were talking just a second ago that I'd like to see a grappler face Sean Woodson so we can kind of see what he's got when he goes against, someone with a good grappling game and submissions and is physically strong. So we'll be interested to see what Sean Woodson does next. He's 12-1 with 1 draw in his career. That draw was against Saldana, like we were talking about. But to start the main card, we had one of the bigger disappointments that I've seen in UFC history. Rebellis Despaigne was a huge hype train coming into this one. We talked about him at length in the previous episode. 6'7" from Cuba, former Olympian and medalist. But, he was taken down by a guy who was a pitcher for the Cincinnati Reds 5 years ago for 15 minutes. And, he didn't look good at all in this one. And Waldo Cortes-Acosta got him on the ground. He had no game plan for how to get up. And it didn't matter that his frame at 6'8" was longer. He didn't know the positionally, where his hands needed to be, where he needed to be with his feet to try and hip escape and get up. He just looked like a fish out of water in this one on the ground, and, it was very alarming. What did you make? Obviously, it was too much too soon for him. How disappointed or were you in this fight?
Yeah, I was definitely disappointed. Obviously, Rebellis Despaigne was looking as to be the next, hype train at the heavyweight division. Maybe, the best talent we've ever seen at heavyweight. Unfortunately, it kind of got exposed in this fight. But, as disappointed as I was very, very impressed with, Waldo Cortes-Acosta. I think he's a very underrated fighter that no one's given credit to. No one really gave him a shot and very, very, overlooked him. I think he's a good fighter, and I wouldn't be surprised, after what we've seen last weekend, if the UFC decided to take Nasimento out after the 15th position and give Acosta that 15th ranked position. He's a decent fighter. He's got a great ground game. And, he definitely controlled this fight. Despaigne had a couple of good punches in the first round, tried to go for the KO. Once he didn't get that, Acosta, controlled the rest of the fight. He even got some good strikes on, was looking pretty good on the feet as well with Despaigne. So I was very, very impressed by Acosta. And for Despaigne, it's just unfortunate. I thought we were going to get another, upcoming contender. Unfortunately, we're disappointed. I don't know where he goes from here. Obviously, he's going to have to still keep fighting unranked guys. But I'm very disappointed in Despaigne, and he's got a lot of work to do. And at this point, I think he's just a big, tall guy with a lot of athletic ability. Can strike a little bit, but pretty much has no skills outside of that.
Yeah, the more I think about it, the more it reminds me of kind of like Czech Congo back in the day. Really explosive athlete, but doesn't have much, to offer when going against like the Cain Velasquez's or the good ground guys. But, he wasn't facing a ground guy in this one. And that's kind of the more disappointing thing to me about it is that Waldo, doesn't have that grappling background. He does have a big right hand. But the thing that really impressed me with Waldo in this one was his mind. He knew and had the intelligence to not stand and trade on the feet with Robelis and got him against the cage, sapped his energy in that first round, and kept going back to the well for what worked for him going to the ground. So, I guess we all underestimated the intelligence of Waldo Acosta in this one, and, he really proved himself. It was a huge win for him. He was a betting underdog significantly. It was a great win, 12-1 for him as well. Same record as Sean Woodson, but I agree with you. I think he's a ranked fighter come tonight when they come out with the UFC rankings. So when we look at the prelims for this one, there were some big standout finishes. The one that really stuck out to me, I was there in attendance for St. Louis this weekend, and the crowd went absolutely crazy when Terrence McKinney got knocked out by Esteban Ribovics. And that head kick McKinney did not see coming, but in a couple of fights in a row, we see McKinney going and fighting Drew Dober, fighting Ribovics right here, fighting Bonfim. Doesn't go for takedowns when he was a collegiate wrestler. Kind of fights these guys, at their own game, and has paid for it tremendously in his career. Knocked out Matt Frivola in his debut in 7 seconds, and in my opinion, that might have been the worst thing to happen to him because he's really fallen in love with his hands and not gone to that wrestling. And it's cost him here significantly with not only losses, but head trauma with huge knockouts back-to-back here, in the last 5 fights. So what did you think of Esteban, and is that the knockout of the year contender? I know that Justin Gaethje, Max Holloway is probably still number 1 on everybody's list, but outside of that, this has to, take the cake.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be up there. One of the candidates. I can only imagine, what it felt like being there live. That knockout was sick. I feel for Terrence McKinney. It looked like he was just trying to figure things out in this sport. It looks like he was starting to get on a nice little win streak. It looks like he was going to start to go on a nice little run, climb the ladder. But unfortunately, Esteban, ended up, putting him right in his tracks. Got a great KO. And, I think it's going to be great for Esteban. I think he's going to get a nice opponent next matchup. This knockout's going to put his name on the map. It's going to be all over social media, so it's great for him. But, equally as bad for Terrence McKinney. This is one of those knockouts that changes the guy's career. We've seen guys get knocked out like this before, and, they may have 1 or 2 losses, and, they never come back the same, Yeah, I was just thinking that's the knockout that made this, made me think of that one. He fought one time after that, and he hasn't fought in 3 years. And, I wouldn't be surprised to see a similar output with Terrence McKinney. You got Tony Ferguson after, the KO from Michael Chandler. Some guys just aren't the same after these vicious KOs, and it's unfortunate for a guy like Terrence McKinney. Also on the prelims, though, on the other fights, I thought, Billy Goff and Trey Waters, I thought that was the fight of the night. Both battled. Show toughness. I said coming into this pay-per-view that was the fight I was looking most forward to in the prelims. Very competitive. I thought it could have gone either way. Obviously, Trey Waters, won the fight. What did you think of that matchup?
Yeah, Billy Goff is super aggressive and as tough as they come. Trey Waters, 6'5", at the weight class, just massive length, is able to put volume on guys, and that was an absolute war, battle of attrition, back and forth. Waters ended up coming out with the victory there. I thought that was the right decision, but Billy Goff is a very tough customer, and that was, in my opinion, the best fight of the night. It won fight of the night, and everybody got 50,000. So I was really, really pleased with that one.
Yeah, and then just one more thing I wanted to bring up on the prelims before we get to the other stuff is I thought Chase Hooper. Yeah. I thought he looked dominant. I love to see his growth. He came in the UFC at a very young age, took his bumps and bruises. But wow, man, the improvement he showed, and particularly in his striking, how much that's improved. We know he's a good grappler. I think, changing weight classes was a great, thing for him. And I think Chase Hooper's got a bright future.
Yeah, and Chase Hooper actually floored Borashev, the seasoned kickboxer, in the first round with a left hand that Borashev didn't see coming. So he's getting better with his hands to go along with that tremendous grappling game. Like you said, 24 years old, he debuted at 20, so he's getting physically stronger as he goes here. And has, had a wealth of experience in the last 4 years and some tough matchups that are going to lead to future success when he does become a contender and get into his prime. This guy's not even close to his prime yet. He's probably 4 years away from even being in his prime. He's 4 years away from being 28 years old, and that's really when you start your prime. So Chase Hooper is going to be one of these guys that I think is going to be a contender and somebody we're going to see for a long time. But he tweeted out after this one that Charles Oliveira in his first 10 fights was 5-5, and Max Holloway in his first 6 fights was 3-3. So when you look at the career of Chase Hooper, yes, he's lost some from time to time, but just the youth and inexperience, I think that guys like him and Raul Rosas Jr., you kind of have to look through a different lens because they start so early and show that talent at such a young age that they kind of get thrown in there to the wolves at times. But Chase Hooper really made a statement, and I thought that was the biggest win of his career. So, yeah, I'm glad we're talking about that one, too. So we had a world title fight in boxing as well. This one took place in Perth, Australia, the hometown of George Kambosos. Kambosos was fighting Vasily Lomachenko, and this one did not go as planned for the Kambosos family. They, had concerns about the referee coming into this one, but in my opinion, of all the boxing matches I've watched in the last 2 or 3 years, this was maybe the best officiated that I'd seen. Maybe the Kambosos family was trying to get a hometown official from Australia. They flew a gentleman in from Tokyo to do this one, and it seemed to be fair and straight down the middle, but Vasily Lomachenko took over after round 3, and at one point during one of the rounds, I believe it was round 4, landed 21 punches to 1. So the output there was just tremendous. His defensive, his ability to avoid punches defensively was very impressive as well. What did you think about this boxing match? And it seemed to be an absolute shutout for Lomachenko, who got the knockout in the 11th round with a body shot.
Yeah, it was just like I predicted. I thought Lomachenko was going to dominate this fight coming in. Like you said, pretty much in the later rounds, after round 3, he really took control over the fight. He looks like he's still in his prime. He's definitely one of the best fighters. And, for Kambosos, he beat, Teofimo Lopez. He's never been the same ever since. I'm not sure if it got to his head or what, or if his work ethic went down. But he's never been the same. Lomachenko on the other end, he lost to Lopez, and he's looking better since that fight. I thought he beat Devin Haney, as I said before. I think he's one of the best fighters in his weight class. I would like to see him maybe fight Tank Davis next. Those are two guys that are, known for being a little smaller and lighter. So I think it's a great matchup. Two guys that haven't fought each other yet. So I think that's a great matchup. And, I think Lomachenko's still at the prime. He's still going to get one of these top guys. Anytime a fighter's going to want to fight him, they're definitely going to have to be well prepared. But for Kambosos, I don't know where he goes from here. He's continuing on this losing streak. And, I don't know where his future is from this point.
Yeah, maybe Kambosos tries to fight like a Raleigh Romero or someone that's, down in the division rankings. But, I liked what you said about Gervonta Tank Davis and Vasily Lomachenko. I think not only is that a matchup that needs to be made because they're both world champions, but I think that's a matchup stylistically that boxing fans can get behind. You have the knockout artist in Tank Davis versus the tactician in Vasily Lomachenko. Will Davis be able to land those devastating punches on someone as defensively sound as Lomachenko? That's a really tough question that I'd like to see boxing experts talk about going forward. So I think that's the right matchup to make. Devin Haney's going to need some time off, and when he does return, I'm sure everybody wants to see him rematch Ryan Garcia if that's at all possible. So I think that's the one that needs to be made is Tank Davis and Vasily Lomachenko. So boxing, like we've been talking about, is in a great place. And also this coming weekend, the biggest fight in the world is going to be in boxing as well, and it's a massive historic fight. for the heavyweight division, and we're going to break it down on Wednesday. Tyson Fury fights Alexander Usyk. Every single heavyweight championship belt will be on the line this Saturday night. Undefeated versus undefeated. Former cruiserweight champion and Usyk moved up in weight, defeated Anthony Joshua twice. We all know Tyson Fury is the lineal heavyweight champion, defeated Klitschko, defeated Wilder in those trilogies, and in that trilogy, and is the most notable and recognizable name in boxing right now outside of Canelo Alvarez. So, and he really brought back the heavyweight division. So how excited are you for the heavyweight fight and also the Bellator card and UFC cards we have this weekend?
Yeah, I think this is a great week of fights. I mean, honestly, this is probably the most excited I've ever been for a boxing match. The last few years, boxing fans have been pretty spoiled. We've been getting a lot of boxing fights that we've been waiting years for. We finally got Errol Spence versus Terrence Crawford. But, I love watching heavyweights. That's my favorite. So I've been waiting to see, who's the top heavyweight. We got Tyson Fury against Usyk, the top two guys of our generation. You got Usyk, who beat Anthony Joshua, and, you got Tyson Fury, who beat Deontay Wilder. So, whoever wins this fight is going to go down as the greatest heavyweight of this generation. And we've been waiting years to see this fight, and it's finally time to really see who's the best heavyweight, maybe not of this generation, but also maybe of all time.
Yeah, certainly. Now, this has been close on the betting odds, and, I think a lot of that has to do with how bad Tyson Fury looked last time out against Francis Ngannou. Did seeing him against Ngannou, does that give you any worry coming into this one? He looks to be in much better physical shape from the videos I've seen so far this week. John Fury actually got into an altercation with Team Usyk today, headbutting a gentleman, and he was bleeding down his face because he headbutted somebody. It was a wild scene. You guys can go check that out online, I'm sure, if you haven't seen it already. But does the fight with Fury and Ngannou, did that give you any cause for concern coming into this one?
Yeah, seeing that blood on his head was definitely pretty crazy from Tyson Fury's dad. You don't see that every fight. But, no, honestly, it doesn't change. The fight with Ngannou doesn't change the way I think of Tyson Fury. I don't think he took that fight seriously. I think he knew he had Ngannou in the bag. You could tell by the way he looked and the way his weight was. He didn't take his training camp seriously. I think he kind of basically didn't even really have a training camp and just went out there with just pure skill and just beat him. It was a close fight, but he beat him just basically on pure skill without even a training camp. Obviously, Usyk is going to be the biggest fight of his career. As you said, we've seen him right now, and Tyson Fury's in the best shape maybe of his life. And, I'm not really worried about him at all. Like I said, I think this is going to be the toughest and hardest he's ever worked for any training camp. And I think this is the fight that he's been working his whole life for.
Yeah, I can't wait for this weekend. Massive fights, whether it's Bellator on Friday night with Patchy Mick versus Magomedov, and then Jaleel Willis and Cedric Doumbé. We've got Edson Barbosa versus Lerone Murphy. And then this, heavyweight clash of the Titans this weekend between Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury. We're going to break it all down for you fight fans on Wednesday, give our previews and predictions for all these great fights this weekend. I'm Brett Cagle. That's Anthony Ballister. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks, Anthony.
See ya.